Hello, everyone. Sorry for the delay. We've been having an exciting afternoon getting 2 episodes ready for you, but we are all set now. Thanks for bearing with us. Welcome to Fairies and Dragons, Ponies and Knights, Season 1, Episode 12 and 13. So we're very excited to be back after our break for 2 episodes. Our first episode, episode 12, is called Mintini. And for that episode, we will be joined by special guest artist Colin Bright. We're excited to have Colin back. He was our very first guest artist way back on episode 1. For episode 13, Fairies, we will be joined by special guest artist Daniel Pertierra. Did I say that right? Yeah, Pertierra, sorry. Daniel Pertierra. So as always, we invite you all to grab your favorite art supplies and illustrate right along with Colin and Daniel, or just listen, watch, whatever you want to do. And after the show, after both episodes, we look forward to hearing your thoughts and seeing your illustrations. Thanks so much, everybody. Enjoy the show. Previously on Fad Pack, Beatrice the Dragon set off on a quest to find fairies and ponies, aided by 2 humans from the city of Durga, Tom Thomas, a stable boy, and Talora Shamsa, a knight in training. While defending her baby, Smudge, from an attacking unicorn, Beatrice is stabbed by the unicorn's horn. While Talora rushes to help Beatrice, Tom takes off after the unicorn, who Beatrice has flung into the nearby woods. While Talora and Beatrice's 5 children attempt to care for the gravely ill Beatrice and continue their quest, Tom's journey takes a different turn. The unicorn didn't stop. It kept charging right through the fire, as if it didn't even feel the heat. Beatrice clearly was not expecting to see the unicorn emerge from her flame unhurt and steadily approaching. It was almost upon her, its horn aimed directly at her heart. She only had time to shift her body slightly, turning her chest away from the attack, before the unicorn slammed into her. Roar! Beatrice screamed in pain. She reared back, raised her front leg, and swiped furiously at her attacker, her clawed foot connecting with the unicorn's side. The unicorn went flying through the air like it had been launched from a catapult, sailing over the nearby bushes and landing out of sight. Beatrice crashed to the ground and was still. "Beatrice! Beatrice!" Talora called as she and Tom ran up the slope toward the dragon's still form. Suddenly, Tom stopped. He knew what he had to do, and he knew he didn't have a choice. Without pausing to explain, he left Talora and ran into the woods in the direction that Beatrice had hurled the unicorn. He could hear Talora behind him, screaming, "Tom! Where are you going?" He didn't have time to explain. He had to find the unicorn, he knew, or Beatrice would die. Tom Thomas was the head stable boy for the Stone, the great castle of Durga. His mother and father ran the stables, a vast and sprawling set of buildings that housed over 200 horses. One day, Tom had been told, ever since he could remember, it would be his job to take over for his parents. His family had run the stables for as long as there had been a Durga, maybe longer. The Thomases were somewhat unique in Durga, as few members of their family throughout the generations had ever aspired toward the honor of knighthood. Instead, they were content to care for the horses. What most people didn't know, however, was that they had a secret. This secret had been kept from Tom for most of his life. Tom did know that his grandparents had been seekers, people obsessed with unicorns and pegasi who spent their lives seeking them. He knew that his grandparents had left on a journey to find these rare and magnificent creatures and had never returned, leaving Tom's father alone to manage the stables when he was a teenager like Tom. Tom's father had never recovered from this loss and forbade the mention of unicorns or pegasi in his presence. And that was all Tom knew, until one day he had received a letter from his great-aunt. Tom had never met her, but he knew that she lived far away and that she was very ill. Inside the envelope was a drawing. It looked ancient. It was a simple picture of a girl sitting easily on the back of a unicorn. At the bottom of the drawing, in the barely legible flowing script Tom associated with old books, was a name, Arla Tomasi. With the picture was a note that said simply, "I thought you should know. Look in the attic. Don't tell your father. With love, Rosemary Thomas. But Tom had noticed that her last name, Thomas, had been crossed out, and written above it was Tomasi, just like the girl in the picture. Beside its age, the picture wasn't particularly remarkable. Tom had seen countless illustrations of the legendary Tomasi, an ancient race of humans who had once lived among the fabled herds of horses, unicorns, and pegasi who, during the time of giants, had all lived together in one huge herd, as the ponies did today. Some even believed that the ponies were descendants of these ancient horses. The Tomasi were part of the herd, living with them, riding them, and caring for them for hundreds of years. No one knew if the Tomasi actually existed. But what child hadn't imagined themselves riding on the back of a unicorn, or flying on a Pegasus, or running with the herd like a wild Tomasi? But none of this explained why his great aunt signed her own name as Tomasi and crossed out Thomas. Tom had raced to the attic, and there he had found the books, the crates of notes, drawings, and maps that not only had belonged to his grandparents, but went farther back, hundreds of years, more even. It was the history of his family. He read everything voraciously. Tom's grandparents had not simply been seekers. As Tom tore through all that was written, he was slowly able to piece together the truth. The legends were real. The Tomasi were real. And Tom Thomas, stable boy of Durga, was one of them. Tom Thomas. No, Tomasi. Tom's ancestors had been the last of the Tomasi, the great riders. Until the Drift. The Drift was a time of great change across all of Dunaya. No one knew exactly when or why or how, but everything had begun to slowly change. Rifts were formed. The weather pattern shifted, and some species disappeared, never to return. The unicorn and pegasi slowly began to dwindle from the herd, leaving the horses behind. Years would go by without a human sighting of either a unicorn or Pegasus, and when they occurred, encounters were often deadly. The remaining herds of horses fractured, dwindled, and dispersed. Many of the Tomasi abandoned the wild and spread across the land to live with humans in houses, villages, and towns. Slowly, they became nothing more than legend. Tom's ancestors had stayed with one of the small remaining herds of horses and settled in the lush land that had eventually become the city of Durga, changing their name to Thomas in order to put their past behind them and maintain their secret. It was because of Tom's family that Durgan horses had always been the finest, as they were descended from the remnants of the Tomasi's herd. But though their lives had changed, Tom's ancestors had never stopped looking for the unicorns and pegasi. With each generation, for hundreds of years, they searched. It was an obsession, passed down from one generation to the next. They kept detailed notes of every encounter, maps of the migratory patterns they observed, and drawings of whatever creatures they could find. It was their dream to someday heal the rift that had occurred between the unicorns, Pegasus, and the horses, and to live among them again. Generation after generation of Tom's family had pursued this goal, that is, until Tom's father. When Tom's grandparents disappeared, Tom's father was left alone to care for his younger siblings and the stables. He vowed never to chase the unicorns again. He hid the books and the papers, and he never told any of the stories to his son. For this reason, out of respect for his father, Tom kept his new knowledge secret and never told his parents what he had discovered. But he couldn't deny his own voracious curiosity, and after years of studying the books and papers left behind by his ancestors, Tom Thomas was now perhaps the leading expert on horses, unicorns, and pegasi in all of Dunaya. Not that anyone knew it, of course. Thanks to the education he had given himself month after month in the dusty, dimly lit attic, there was one thing that he knew for sure. Nothing, not even the strongest magic, could cure a wound made from a unicorn's horn, except for the unicorn itself. And so when Beatrice had been stabbed, he had known instantly that somehow he must find that unicorn, and he didn't know what next. He just knew that without that unicorn, Beatrice would die. And so he had run, knowing he had only seconds to catch it before it bolted into the woods, lost forever. He had been lucky the unicorn was wounded and therefore slower, and had managed to catch up to it just as it disappeared into the brush, heading deeper into the mountains. He had stayed silent, kept his distance, as he had begun to track the unicorn. Now it was a day later, and darkness was falling again. Tom was rubbing a handful of stinging nettles against his arms. It was the only thing he could think of to keep himself awake. He hadn't slept last night, and he couldn't afford to sleep tonight either. It had been over 24 hours since Beatrice had been stabbed, and even though it was unlikely she was still alive, he couldn't give up. She was a dragon, after all, and he was certain she would last longer than the humans he had read about. He might still have time. Right now, the unicorn was about 30 yards ahead of Tom, asleep for the moment. It was the closest it had allowed Tom to get during the last 24 hours, and he felt a small surge of victory when he realized it meant that it felt safe enough to sleep in his presence. It was badly hurt. Tom could see long gashes along its side from Beatrice's talons, and one of its ankles was at least sprained, if not broken. When the unicorn had first sensed that Tom was following, it had taken off running, but Tom had been able to keep it in sight. It clearly hated being followed and wanted badly to charge at Tom, sometimes facing off toward him, snorting and stamping its hooves. So far, it hadn't tried to charge, probably knowing it was too weak. Tom had doggedly pursued the unicorn, getting more and more tired, but refusing to give up. Finally, it had paused to rest near the rocky mouth of a canyon. There was a small waterfall and a large, shallow pool leading to a stream that ran out into the woods where Tom was trying to stay hidden. This was Tom's chance. He had to make friends with this unicorn. But how? Humans and unicorns had had nothing to do with each other for maybe 1,000 years. But he was a Tomasi, he reminded himself. Maybe he could do this. As Tom slumped against a tree, his eyes trained on the unicorn's sleeping form, he considered his options. He had noticed that it was having trouble eating, being unable to bend its head much. Perhaps it had pulled a muscle in its neck. There wasn't much grass here, so the unicorn had to lift its head to pull leaves off of bushes or low trees, and when it tried, it looked like it was straining painfully. Tom made a decision. He would bring food to the unicorn. He wandered the woods, collecting anything he thought it might like to eat. Leaves, a handful of berries, a small tuft of grass. But how would he get the food close enough without spooking the unicorn? He tried to think what he would do if this were one of his horses back in Durga. Tom was one of the best trainers at the stone, and getting a young horse ready for the saddle was his specialty. He often drew an audience while he was training because his method was so unique. Tom would pretend he was a horse, mimicking a horse's submissive or dominant behavior in his eye contact, his body language, and in his rewards and reprimands. He would do this for as long as it took until he gained the trust of the horse he was training. So maybe he should just be a unicorn. That shouldn't be too hard. Just be a unicorn. There was a large rock about halfway between himself and the unicorn. If he could drop the food there, the unicorn would have no trouble eating it off the rock, and Tom would have gotten closer than he had been yet. He took off his shirt and bundled the food inside, then studied the sleeping creature. If I were a unicorn, what would I do? He thought. Ignoring his human instinct to creep softly forward, Tom summoned up his courage and boldly stepped out from behind a tree, neighing loudly to get the unicorn's attention. Then he stomped his foot hard. The unicorn woke and turned to face him. Its ears lay back on its head. Not a good sign. If Tom wasn't careful and the unicorn charged, he might not be able to get away in time. But wait, I'm a unicorn too, he reminded himself. I'm the one who charges. He stamped his foot again and snorted. Glaring at the unicorn with all the anger and ferocity that he could muster, he took a step forward. The unicorn didn't budge. Tom neighed again and took another step forward, stamping and snorting, shaking his own hair like it was a mane. The unicorn rose and took an aggressive step toward Tom. Uh-oh, he thought. Okay, cool off. He wanted the unicorn to think he was confident, but not that he was challenging it. He took a step sideways and pretended for a moment to ignore his quarry. He could feel that it was watching him very closely. Tom opened his shirt bundle, took out some leaves, and stuck them in his mouth, chewing them extravagantly, so that it would know what he was carrying. The leaves did not taste good, but Tom continued bravely. He looked at the unicorn again, neighed loudly, shook his hair, and stamped his foot. The unicorn surprised him by repeating his actions, and then suddenly charging. Before he could stop himself, Tom screamed, but then quickly tried to turn it into a roar. Ah! Oh, no! The unicorn stopped. Tom's heart was thudding so loudly he was sure the unicorn could feel his fear. A squirrel skittered across the rocks near Tom. It stopped and looked at it. You're a unicorn, he reminded himself. He looked at the squirrel, then charged at it again. Nay! The squirrel tore away, and Tom stamped and snorted as though satisfied. He sneaked a look at the unicorn. He thought he could sense its surprise and maybe even amusement. Carefully, Tom placed the bundle of food on the ground and did his best to make his way back to the cover of the trees in as unicorn-like a fashion as he could manage. He slipped behind a tree so that he could watch. Slowly, suspiciously, the unicorn made its way to the food and ate. Ha! It worked, thought Tom triumphantly. Tom repeated this whole routine many times throughout the night. Each time he dropped off a pile of food, he didn't retreat as far, so that as dawn approached, he was fully visible to the unicorn as it ate. But it wasn't enough. Tom needed to get closer, and quickly. He was worried about Beatrice, and he was also nervous about the gashes on the unicorn's side. They looked like they were getting infected. He wanted to clean them out, but that would mean getting close enough to touch them. As the unicorn dozed, he gathered a few plants he knew for their healing properties and mashed them between some rocks with mud, creating a thick paste for a healing poultice. "Okay," Tom said softly. "Here goes nothing." Tom took his shirt off and again made a bundle, this time holding his poultice supplies. He had a new plan to get closer to the unicorn, close enough to touch it. He knew it was crazy, but he was too tired to come up with anything else. He looked around until he found a rock with a sharp edge. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the rock into his skin just below his collarbone until he started to bleed. Wincing, he drew the rock across his chest, creating a long, shallow scrape. "Ow, ow, 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 ow," said Tom quietly. It wasn't deep, but it hurt like crazy, and it bled a lot. Good, though, that was what he needed. He walked to the edge of the clearing where the unicorn lay, and then he pulled out all of his theatrics. He groaned loudly in agony, startling the unicorn awake. "Oh!" he moaned, stumbling forward, making a great display of his pain and his bloody chest. He did his best not to look at the unicorn, acting like it wasn't there. He headed toward the pool beneath the waterfall. He was now closer to the unicorn than he had been so far, close enough for the unicorn to stab or trample him no matter how hurt it was. He kept going, moaning pitifully and making every step seem difficult and painful. The unicorn didn't charge. It seemed to be staring at him in amazement, and even took a few steps back to let him pass. He came within an arm's length of it, and even though he was bleeding from his chest and covered in welts from the stinging nettle, he couldn't help but feel pretty good about things so far. He was standing closer to a unicorn than any human had in recent history, and he hadn't been stabbed or trampled. Yet. He made it to the water and clumsily waded in. Oh, sun and stars! It was cold. Cold, 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 cold! Once he was waist deep, he faced the unicorn and made a great show of washing his chest. Once he'd cleaned off the blood, he carefully unwrapped his shirt and pulled out a bit of the paste he had made. He smeared it across the cut on his chest and dramatized the soothing feeling it gave him. Ah, so much better. Ah! Once he was finished, he looked directly at the unicorn. The unicorn looked at Tom. Tom nodded his head toward the wound on the unicorn's side. He took a step toward it, but the unicorn's ears went back and it stamped and snorted. Tom took another step. The unicorn stared at Tom, then slowly, miraculously, took a step toward him, putting its hoof in the water. Then, something strange happened. Tom felt very, very cold, and he couldn't move. He looked down and realized that the unicorn had turned the water, the whole pool of water, into solid ice. Tom was trapped waist deep in a block of ice. "Hey, that's not fair," he said to the unicorn. The unicorn slowly walked over the frozen surface of the pool until it was towering above Tom. He could be trampled or gored easily now, but somehow he wasn't afraid. He was in awe. This is what his family had been searching for thousands of years. He felt a kinship with this creature, and without pausing to think, he reached his hand up. He could see now that the unicorn was male, and as he extended his hand outward, the unicorn thrust his neck out and began sniffing Tom all over, finally lowering his head to sniff the poultice on Tom's chest. The 2-foot-long unicorn horn was pointing directly at Tom's face, and he examined it closely, his heart racing. It was the color of the inside of a clamshell, and not smooth, as he had assumed. Rather, the surface was uneven and somewhat rugged-looking, as if it had been roughly hewn from rock. It ended in a tip so sharp it hurt just to look at it. Tom summoned up his courage, raised a finger, and touched the horn. As he did, A surge of energy rippled through his body, searing into his consciousness. For a moment, Tom lost track of his own breath, his own heartbeat, and could only feel the unicorn's heartbeat thudding in his chest and the pain from the unicorn's injuries pulsing through his body. He had been right. There was a flash of pain shooting through the unicorn's neck, and his ankle was certainly sprained. In addition to the physical sensations, there was a swirl of emotions and visions. There were beautiful landscapes, herds of horses, unicorns, pegasi, and other creatures that Tom didn't recognize. There was peace and happiness, but also loneliness and anger. Tom realized suddenly with wild acceleration that while he was touching the horn, he was somehow linked to the unicorn and could see and feel all that the unicorn had ever seen or felt. Gasping, he pulled his hand away. He had only touched the horn for a moment, but it felt as though he had seen 1,000 years' worth of turmoil. The unicorn looked at Tom for a long moment before resting his nose against Tom's cheek. Then he turned and walked slowly to shore. The ice melted and Tom was free. He looked down at his body and saw that the welts from the stinging nettle had disappeared, as had the wound he had made across his chest. The unicorn had healed him. Tom wondered why he couldn't have done the same for himself. Tom walked out of the water, holding out his poultice bundle. "Hey there," he said. "Come on, let me help you now." The unicorn dipped his head and moved closer to Tom, who cupped his hands in the water, pouring handful after handful over the unicorn's sides, wiping away the dirt and blood. He tried to be gentle, but at one point he must have pushed too hard, and the unicorn snorted and shoved his body against Tom, knocking him into the cold water. "Hey," spluttered Tom. "I'm sorry. I'm doing my best. I gotta get it all clean." He could have sworn that the unicorn was laughing at him as he emerged, dripping from the pool to resume his cleaning. Once he had finished, Tom ran his hand softly down the unicorn's nose. "Good job. I know that wasn't easy. You're very patient. Now, let me cover those up. That will make them feel better, okay?" The unicorn was still as Tom applied the healing poultice to the gashes. "I'm sorry. I don't know how to help you with your sore neck or your ankle right now. You should just try to rest them both. I can keep getting you food until they feel better, okay?" The unicorn nudged him gently in response. Tom took a deep breath. "Listen, I need to talk to you about something. The dragon that did this to you, she was just trying to protect her baby. She's actually, she's a really nice dragon. She's on a mission to talk to the ponies. She wants to find out whatever's going on that's making these creatures not get along, I guess. And that's a good thing, right?" The unicorn just stared at Tom. "Well, anyway, I know that, she's probably going to die unless you help her. Do you think that you could help her? I know that's a lot to ask. If there's anything I can do for you, I will. I swear it, I will." The unicorn looked at Tom in silence. Tom felt as though he was thinking, considering things, considering Tom. Then he turned away from Tom, walked to the edge of the water, bent his head down, and touched his horn to the surface of the small pond. A silver ripple radiated outward from the unicorn's horn. He raised his head and looked at Tom, who looked down into the surface of the pool. He gasped. Instead of his own reflection, he saw Talora, laying on her back beside a curled-up Smudge, her eyes wide open and looking up at the sky. "Talora!" yelled Tom. But of course she couldn't hear him. This was some kind of vision. How was he seeing this? He wrenched his gaze from Talora and Smudge and saw Petra and Azrael sleeping nearby. They were near a river, the Crystal River, it must be. And then he saw Beatrice, lying on something that looked like a kind of sled. This wasn't the camp I left them at, he thought out loud. They must be further downriver, but how? Beatrice has to be unconscious. How did they get her? Then it dawned on him. It isn't a sled. It's a raft. Oh no, they're downriver. If they traveled by river, that means they've been moving quickly. They're days ahead of us now. How can we get to them in time? He looked up at the unicorn, who stared blankly back at him. Then the weight of it all came crashing down on Tom. No, this can't be. I found you and we're friends now. I was supposed to help her. I was supposed to save her, but there's no way we can get to them now. No, this is all my fault. Tears welled up in Tom's eyes and fell as he blinked. What am I even doing here? I'm just a dunderheaded stable boy, aren't I? I'm not a knight. I'm not even a knight in training. I just thought, maybe, I don't know, they could use someone like me. And then I made it through the contest. I made it. And she chose me. She chose me to help them. And what do? I get her killed over a little kitten. Ugh! It's not fair. It's not fair, Mintini. It's not fair. Tom crouched by the pool, his head in his hands, and sobbed. The unicorn watched him silently. After a moment, he pressed his nose against Tom's shoulder. Tom raised his arm, curling it around the top of the unicorn's head. I don't know why I just called you Mintini. It just came out. It seemed like your name. Is it your name? The unicorn pulled away from Tom and started to paw the ground in agitation. Oh, I'm sorry, Tom said. If you don't like it, I can call you something else. As Tom studied the unicorn, trying to figure out why that name had sprung to mind, and if it was somehow actually the creature's name, he noticed that the unicorn's horn had begun to glow. It was getting brighter and brighter as he watched, to the point that he had to squint against its light. The glow spread to the unicorn's whole body, and then the forest and canyon around them was illuminated in a pulsing white light. Suddenly there was a flash of even brighter light, and then everything was dark again. Well, not completely dark. It took a while for Tom's eyes to readjust, but as he blinked furiously, he began to see tiny pinpricks of light around him, and as he watched, these pinpricks grew more numerous and intensely bright, until there was light everywhere, fluorescent light in hundreds of different colors. It was as if all of the plants, insects, and rocks were glowing vibrantly, lit from within. In his peripheral vision, he thought he detected small, flying shapes around him, but when he turned to identify them, they were gone. Tom gasped as he realized that he was seeing, for the first time in his life, the fairies. And now, episode 13, Fairies, with special guest artist, Daniel Pertierra. Tom looked over at Mintini, the unicorn, his horn still glowing with a strange light. They were still in the clearing with a pool nearby, yet everything was different. Besides the glow that seemed to be emanating from everything around them, the little waterfall looked as though it was falling in slow motion, each drop of water like a glistening diamond, and the pool looked as though it was made of mercury, the surface rippling luxuriously. What had the unicorn done? It felt almost like he had pulled back some kind of a curtain, and beyond that curtain was an entirely different world that had existed beside them all along, but only becoming visible just now. Suddenly, Tom realized that one of the mysterious flying shapes was moving toward him, and this time he could make it out clearly. His jaw dropped. The shape was joined by another, and the two small winged creatures paused so that they were hovering in mid-air in front of the unicorn. They were about as tall as Tom's hand, roughly human in shape, and suspended by multifaceted wings that reminded Tom of a dragonfly's. Their bodies shimmered and sparkled, and their long hair rippled down their backs, glowing like a lava flow. These were fairies. Tom tried to shut his mouth, but he couldn't quite manage it. He began to notice that the flying shapes were everywhere, dozens of them, filling the clearing with their gentle luminescence. Then, one of the fairies hovering in front of the unicorn spoke. "Oh, great, Mintini," it said. "To what do we owe this rare pleasure?" This must be where the fairies live, Tom thought. Somehow the unicorn had brought them here to this world, so like their own, and yet also completely different. Apparently the unicorn's name was Mintini. He hadn't just made that up. The unicorn huffed and nodded towards Tom. The two fairies, who apparently hadn't yet seen Tom, turned to look in his direction. "Ah!" they screamed as soon as they saw him. "Human!" It was as if someone had paused everything. The flow of the waterfall froze completely, the trees ceased to rustle, and the hovering fairies in the clearing stopped moving, but only for an instant. In the next second, a handful of fairies, including the two who had addressed the unicorn, flew at Tom. By this point, Tom was feeling extremely nervous. The energy in the clearing had shifted from dreamy and peaceful to alert and tense. He looked over at the unicorn, who seemed unconcerned. Tom gulped and stood up straight, staring at the fairies as they paused in midair before his face. They began to circle around his head and fly up and down his body, talking as they went. Ugh, human! Disgusting! I like it. Can I poke it? The smell, like horse droppings. What do you think it tastes like? Its hair is an absolute bird's nest. And don't get me started on those clothes. Ooh, but pockets. Can I ride in one? As Tom held still, feeling extremely vulnerable, he observed his welcome committee. Now that they were closer, he could see that their ears were pointed and their eyes were bright with shining black irises. Each fairy's skin glowed and shimmered in a different color. Their thin wings were transparent and beat quickly like a hummingbird's, only without the buzzing sound. They all seemed to be the same age, one minute looking very young, but the next, somehow, absolutely ancient. They were gorgeous and completely mesmerizing to look at. Their voices were melodic and tinkling, reminding Tom of little bells. Tom heard a loud buzzing in his ear and felt a tiny hand poke inside. Ooh, look, a gold mine! Ah, hey, stop that! Said Tom, involuntarily swatting at the fairy. Ah, we've been attacked! Typical human, always resorting to violence. Respond in kind. Battle formation! The fairies quickly fluttered away from Tom, forming a half circle in front of him. Wait, said Tom. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to swat at you. It's just, that was my ear. Want to keep your gold to yourself, eh? Said a fairy with dark purple skin in front of him. Well, I can understand that. It's not gold, it's just, earwax. Prove it, said another fairy with pale yellow skin. Give me some. This wasn't what Tom would have guessed he'd be doing upon first meeting fairies, but he obligingly reached into his ear and dug out some earwax. Then he offered it to the fairies. They crowded around. Ooh, gold, they all seemed to say at once. The yellow fairy swooped down to Tom's finger and scooped some off the tip. It's beautiful, the fairy sighed, holding it up to get a better look, and so much softer than regular gold. Tom was trying very hard not to laugh. He turned to Mintini and said, I had no idea my earwax was so special. Look at how much she likes it. The yellow fairy glanced sharply up from the earwax cupped in its hands. She? Oh, I'm sorry. He, Tom said hastily. He hadn't realized that the fairy was male. The yellow fairy was staring in confusion at Tom. I am Citrine. Not he, not she. Then the purple fairy swooped in, sighing, and addressed the yellow fairy. Remember, Citrine, these humans love their labels. They feel the need to categorize and define everything with their he's and their she's. Citrine made a face like an unpleasant smell was on the air. Oh, of course. How restrictive. I am Citrine from the quartz family of the crystal fairies. I manifest abundance, wealth, prosperity, and creativity. The purple fairy turned to study Tom. And I am Amethyst. I manifest health and healing. We are not he or she. We are all. We are everything. We are multitudes. You may call us by our names. Tom tried to take this all in, still staring agape at the fairies. The fairy called Citrine spoke. Oh dear, we seem to have broken it. Its mouth parts are stuck open. Anyway, human, thank you for the earwax gold. You are very welcome, Tom finally managed. The fairies stopped examining the earwax and resumed their battle formation. The purple one, Amethyst, spoke first. All right, you. What's your name? Tom Thomas. What was that? Asked the fairy. Thomas, repeated Tom. Tom Thomas. All right then, Thomas, Tom Thomas. We're taking you to Carnelian, the Diamond Wing. They'll sort this out. Follow us. The formation of fairies turned and started flying back toward the waterfall, disappearing behind the curtain of water. Tom looked around. There seemed to be hundreds of tiny faces watching him from behind rocks, trees, and bushes. He didn't have any choice but to follow them. He would have to go through the water. He looked at the unicorn. Mintini touched the water with his hoof, freezing it once more so that they could walk across. Thanks, said Tom, stepping out onto the ice behind the fairies. He looked behind him. Mintini was following. That made Tom feel much better. When they reached the waterfall, Tom noticed that each individual drop of water could be seen and distinguished from the rest as they fell in slow motion like little balls of glass. Time must travel much differently here, he thought. As he pushed through the drops, they wet his face, hair, and clothes. Felt good, refreshing, and cleansing. Tom and the unicorn emerged from the waterfall into a wide tunnel. It glowed in a delicate light emanating from crystals all around, embedded in the walls, ceilings, and floors, and lying in huge chunks on the ground. Tom followed the fairies deeper in as the tunnel wound around and sloped downwards. They passed dozens of fairies looking quite busy, some of them pausing to look at Tom with expressions of disgust or amusement. Tom noticed, however, that almost every fairy they passed dipped their heads respectfully toward the unicorn. They were led deeper and deeper into the cave until the tunnel opened up into a vast cavern. Amethyst fluttered near to Tom's ear and spoke. "Welcome, human, to the realm of Carnelian, diamond wing of the crystal fairies." Tom gasped and looked around him in amazement. The crystals here were enormous. There was a large pool of still water with a small island at its center. The island had clear, tall crystals growing out of it in all different directions and at many different heights. On the tallest crystal, Tom could barely make out a tiny fairy sitting at its top. Once they reached the edge of the pool, Amethyst spoke. "Your Majesty, I present Thomas the human, and Mintini the unicorn." Tom Thomas, Tom corrected the fairy. "My apologies, Thomas the human." No, just Tom, corrected Tom again. "My apologies, Your Majesty, this human speaks in riddles and rhymes. Tom the human." Tom didn't feel like correcting the fairy again. The fairy sitting on the tall crystal spoke in a voice so clear and sharp Tom could feel it in his bones. "Thank you, Amethyst. Welcome, Mintini. It has been a long time. And welcome, Tom the human. It has been far longer since we've had one of your kind in our halls." The fairy's voice filled the cavern, and light seemed to dance off the crystals as they spoke. "Come closer." The fairies that had led Tom and Mintini into the cave flew to the island and perched neatly on top of the crystal formations. Tom reached out with his foot to step into the water, but his foot didn't sink. Instead, it rested firmly on top of the surface. It was solid and smooth, like glass. He took another step, and another. He was walking on top of the water, if water is what this was. He looked down, noticing brightly colored fish swimming lazily below his feet. It was definitely water. Mintini followed closely behind him, and together they walked quietly up to the island. Tom stopped when he reached the crystal with Carnelian perched on top, and looked directly into the fairy's eyes, which were almost level with his own. The fairy's skin was a lustrous brownish red, and their wings seemed much bigger than the other fairies and shaped more like a butterfly's. Carnelian wore a crown that looked as though it were made entirely of diamonds. "Ah, much better. I am Carnelian, diamond wing of the crystal fairies. Welcome to my palace. Mintini, I see that you have very generously let this human rub mud all over you, and I'm sure that that was a lovely bonding experience for both of you and so on. But perhaps you would allow Amethyst here to heal you properly." Tom looked sheepishly at where he had rubbed his poultices across Mintini's wounds, and it did indeed look rather shabby here in this fairy palace, surrounded by ethereal light and beauty. Mintini bowed his head to Carnelian, and Amethyst flew out from their perch and began fluttering around Mintini, examining the wounds. "Ew, muddy," complained Amethyst, who continued to mutter as they flew slowly around Mintini, examining the unicorn closely. Tom could make out phrases such as "incompetent human healing practices" and "getting mud out of this coat is going to be an absolute nightmare." Carnelian spoke over Amethyst's indignant words. "Now tell me, Tom, what brings you here? It must be very important, for Mintini knows the risk." What is the risk?" asked Tom nervously. Carnelian smiled. "The risk? Ah, well, it is simple. No human may enter our caves and expect to leave, of course, unless we find you worthy. Mintini seems to think you might be, but we'll have to see for ourselves. So tell me, what brings you here?" There was something frightening in Carnelian's level gaze, but Tom found himself unable to glance away from the rich golden brown of her eyes. No, not her, he reminded himself. Carnelian. It made sense. Her or him didn't seem to fit Carnelian or any of the fairies, really, much in the same way that calling them old or young didn't fit. He gulped and tried to answer. Well, I'm not sure exactly. Mintini brought me here. I guess I don't really know why. Tom glanced over at Mintini, who he thought was looking vaguely embarrassed. Carnelian sighed in exasperation. I have forgotten how tedious speaking to humans can be. You don't know anything. Carnelian slowed their speech and spoke loudly. Why do you think Mintini brought you here? How long have the two of you been friends? About an hour, said Tom. No, Tom, no, that is not what Mintini says, replied Carnelian. Mintini says you've been friends for much longer, but that he hasn't seen your kind for over 1,000 years. He wasn't certain until you touched his horn and said his name. Then he knew. It was the name that your, what do you call it, grandmother? Great-great-grandmother? I don't even know. How many greats would that be? Amethyst, will you figure that out, please? It was the name that your some number of greats grandmother gave to him a long, long time ago. Arla Tomasi. An image of the picture he had seen of a girl riding a unicorn flashed into Tom's mind, the name Arla Tomasi written below it. Did that mean that his ancestors had known Mintini? How old was this unicorn anyway? He gaped at Mintini, his mind exploding. What? Wait, how is that? What are you... Ugh, stop that, said Carnelian. You are going to catch a fish in that mouth. Now, let's try this again. What brought you here? And if you say that Mintini brought you, I will turn you into a horsefly. Mintini, I believe, said something about a dragon. Tom snapped out of it. Yes, that's why I'm here. I need your help. We're here because of a very good friend of mine, a dragon. Mintini stabbed her with his horn, and now she's going to die unless we get to her in time. Can you help us? A human who is friends with unicorns and dragons. Very interesting, Tom. You seem more worthy every moment, despite your enormous unblinking eyes and constantly gaping mouth. Why are you traveling with dragons? Well, it's complicated. We're on a mission to find the ponies and fairies. Actually, the dragon who's hurt, she's the keeper of Scrag Mountain. She takes care of it, I guess. And she thinks that the ponies and the fairies have been causing her problems and that they stole one of her eggs, her baby. So she wants to find them and try to figure out what's going on without getting all dragon crazy, she wants to do it peacefully, he added quickly as Carnelian's eyes narrowed. Ahem, interrupted Amethyst, who had paused in their healing of Mintini. I believe that would be 25 greats, approximately, Your Majesty, depending, of course, on the average lifespan and exact time of birth from generation to generation. Carnelian silenced Amethyst with a gesture and stared at Tom thoughtfully for a moment before speaking. No dragon has ever sought out the fairies, as far as I can remember. Very curious indeed. Carnelian seemed lost in thought. After a while, Tom asked tentatively, Do you think you can help? A hint of a smile played across Carnelian's face. Tom, I think I will help. The dragon, anyway. I'm interested in her mission, and she's looking for me, yes? I love that. You, on the other hand, it has been so long since I've had a human to look upon and to do my bidding. It is really such fun when we get one. Although if I kept you, I'm sure there would be a great boo-hooing amongst your friends, and honestly, I do find that very annoying. Carnelian paused. Perhaps if you pass a final test of your worthiness, I will consider releasing you. Tom was getting very nervous. There were countless stories about the mischief of fairies, their tests and riddles, and what happened to poor humans who failed them. Carnelian was beaming at Tom now. Yes, I've got it. I would like a song. The song must make me laugh. If your song can make me laugh, you may go. If not, you must stay here forever. Or for your forever anyway, which really isn't very long for us, of course. Anyway, funny song. It has been just such a long time since I've heard something funny. Amethyst's jokes have been getting old for ages. But, Your Grace, I don't have any jokes, said Amethyst. My point exactly, replied Carnelian. Song, Tom. Tom's mind started to race. A funny song. Tom knew hundreds of songs. He loved to sing. But how many of them were funny? And would Carnelian and Tom think the same things were funny? Also, he was so nervous he was having a hard time remembering any of the songs he did know. As soon as he thought he'd wrapped his mind around one, it slipped away like smoke. Hurry up. I am so exhausted from watching you think that I'm going to need a nap, said Carnelian. The only thing Tom's mind seemed to be able to hold on to was a song he'd made up to pass the time while he was cleaning out horse stalls. He had never sung it in front of anyone before. Here goes nothing, he thought, took a deep breath, and began. Oh, it's good to be a Thomas in the stables all day. We care for the horses, but it's more than just hay. When a horsey cooks up a special horsey pie, it's not the kind you eat, remember me, oh my, 'cause it's poop. Yeah, it's just poop, de doop. It's not the stool that you sit on or the number 2 in math, but it's great for those roses that grow along the path. We may not have the beetles, but we've surely got the dung, and we never waste the waste in the gardens it's flung, 'cause it's poop. Yeah, it's just poop de doop. As long as you're careful not to step right in it, it'll be all over in a shovel scooping minute. 'Cause we Thomases can handle the manure real good. We will clean up the stables just like we should. We scoop poop. Yeah, we scoop poop de doop. Tom finished. He looked around. The room was silent. Everyone was staring at him. Carnelian's eyes were wide open, and their jaw had dropped open. Tom looked at Mintini, who was again looking a little embarrassed. Tom could feel his face getting red. Had he really just sung a song about poop to a magical, powerful fairy ruler and his new unicorn friend? Then, suddenly, Carnelian's laugh rang out, breaking the silence. "Ha!" exclaimed Carnelian. Again! Sing it again! Oh, okay, said Tom, and he sang the song again. This time around, everyone in the room enjoyed the song more openly, a few fairies even joining in on the poop-de-doops. Carnelian was grinning widely, relishing every word. When Tom finished, Carnelian fluttered into the air, clapping, and flew directly up to Tom's face. Oh, Tom, you are just my most favorite. You are certainly worthy. Now let's go save your dragon friend.
Hi, everybody. If you'd like to turn your camera on and join us, we'd love to say hi and hear your thoughts, see your illustrations, anything you got for us. I think we are joined by both of our artists today, I think. We've definitely got Daniel here, and I think Colin too, maybe if he's available. Is it okay if I ask you artists a few quick questions?
Sure.
Great. Okay. Daniel, do you prefer Dan?
That works.
Great. Well, I love your outfit. This is amazing. So great. Is that chainmail? So cool. So my question is, I loved the drawing you created, and I was curious why you chose to portray Tom from behind. I mean, I loved how much we could tell about him from his body language and just how his stance and everything, but I'm just curious where that decision came from.
Well, when I was imagining the picture in my head, I was trying to figure out a way to both show off the fairy monarch and Tom at the same time. Mm-hmm. I couldn't get their faces both at the same time and still get the perspective right. So I decided okay, we're seeing things from Tom's perspective. So we're looking over his shoulder at the scene. That was the best way I could figure out to get Tom and the king at the same time. Not the king, sorry. Carnelli and the Diamond Wing at the same time.
Yep. Yeah, that makes total sense. I loved it. I loved that perspective. It's really fun.
Thank you.
Yeah. Did you have any questions, Dominic, for Dan?
I know you've done, actually, you've written your own book and illustrated it as well. Do you want to tell us about some more of the your adventures in the realms of fantasy storytelling?
Unfortunately, the book is out of print, though I am working on a few other ones. But unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot to say anymore. The book's out of print, so I can't talk a whole lot about it. But I've been watching fantasy movies, reading fantasy stories, and playing fantasy games for as long as I can live. So I've had a lot of images in my head, and it was fun to get them out.
Yeah, that's great. I don't know, Colin, if you're, I see you there, but you look busy. Can I ask you a quick question? Great, thank you.
Right.
So Colin, hi. Thank you for joining us again. Now I know that you're returning to us after several episodes, and so you've perhaps had some time to think about this question that I sometimes like to throw at our artists. But do you have a favorite Fad Pack character?
Smudge, hands down.
Smudge does seem to win this.
Embodies the chaotic spirit of adventure.
Yes, it's so true. We'll have to get you an episode where you can illustrate Smudge someday. So why did you choose the image that you chose, Colin, for this episode?
In thinking about art history, which I've studied a lot, there's so many really famous images burned into my mind of that pond in a little magical clearing in the woods. We see it over and over again throughout mythology. So instantly when I started reading through the episode, that was where my mind went.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, you're right. That makes so much sense.
Yeah,
That's
those
really
pools
cool.
are always a place of magic.
Right. Yeah, it's really fascinating doing 2 episodes back to back like this and seeing 2 completely different portrayals of the same character, because we haven't seen Tom in any of our illustrations for any of our episodes yet. So we got a double dose today, and that was pretty awesome. I am seeing a lot of folks wanting to share their art, so maybe we should move on to that. Poppy, would you like to show us what you've got going on there?
Okay, what would you like to tell them about your art?
I'm doing this for the episodes.
Pops, tell them about how did you choose what to color? Do the colors.
This is
Pops, we're going to talk about this piece of art that you've got right here. Okay, I think she said all she's got to say about it.
That's totally fine. Thank you for showing us, Poppy. I love that bright green.
She was working on another page
That's
too.
great. Are those puppies?
this is my favorite one. This is
Yeah.
my favorite one.
Yeah.
Puppies and paw prints. Very fun. I don't have any puppies in Fad Pack yet. We should try and change that. Does anyone else want to share? Ryan?
I made this picture. It's kind of Fad Pack related, kind of not. Like, if you can see the feet on the back are clawed, so that's a bit different, but it's basically the unicorn in the.
Oh, that's so cool.
About that.
I love that. That's really beautiful. Yeah, it's kind of fun to make, Fad Pack inspired art, even if it's not, necessarily exactly from Fad Pack. Like what Dan was saying, drawing fantasy characters and creatures I think is just so amazing, because there's no right way to do it, and there's no limitations on what you draw. It's totally your own thing. Mia, did you have something you wanted to share? Wow, look at that. You want to tell us about it?
These are 2 ponies.
Oh, I love their colors. They're so bright.
And this is the dragon's mom.
Beatrice?
The Beatrice with the ponies. Yeah. Mia, that's really fun. I like how they have such dark, clear outlines and then you fill them in with color. That's really fun to look at. Thank you for sharing.
Do you want us to show yours? Yeah. Okay. Do you want me to hold it up while you show? Fiona did her first one.
Oh, thanks, Fiona. I'd love to see it. Wow.
Hi. And what is it a picture of?
2 ponies.
2 ponies.
2 ponies. Those are wonderful ponies, Fiona. I love them. Thank you for sharing. You both did a great job. Does anyone else want to share artwork or ask a question? Oliver and Graceland, you want to share some artwork?
Yes. It's a dragon. See that X on its eye?
Yeah.
It's not dead. It's just pretending to be dead.
Okay. Got it. Just faking?
Yeah.
Is that any specific dragon or just a dragon?
The same dragon.
Okay.
And this is a picture of an angry fairy.
Oh, I don't know about you, but I would not want to meet an angry fairy.
And it's in a war machine.
Oh, a what machine?
A war machine.
A war machine. Wow. That explains why it's angry.
And this is a type of dragon.
Oh, wow. Oliver, you were very busy during this episode.
So we got 2 episodes. We got
That's true.
double
2 episodes, lots of time for
And
artwork.
I know that Oliver made 3, but I just made 2, and I was very busy too. So this is my first one. It's just a creature.
Wow.
Got 2 sets of eyes.
Did you do that with marker? It looks so vibrant.
I did
Yeah.
it with shimmer and glitter markers.
Do you have a
Okay.
name for that monster, that creature?
I had a name for it. Oh, I just renamed it. It's a woofer spike.
A woofer spike. That's a good name.
It's a
Love
woofer.
it.
And then this is just another creature, but I have no idea what it is. It's just a creature.
Cool. Also very well. Thanks, Graceland and Oliver.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Anybody
I'll
else?
see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Oh, Lily, Willow.
I think Rowan wanted to show you what he was working on.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll come right back to you. Rowan, show us what you've got.
How did you like
Ooh.
while you were listening to the words? Yeah.
Yeah, coloring
Okay.
and listening can be really fun, huh? Relaxing. Thank you, Rowan. Okay, back to you, Lily or Willow. Sorry.
This is Petra.
Oh, Petra. Yeah, we didn't see any dragons in these last 2 episodes, but I'm glad that you still drew dragons, Lily. That's beautiful.
And Oliver.
And Oliver, that's true. Thank you, Oliver.
Lily, Willow, do you have one? Who's that?
That's the fairy and the unicorn.
Oh, that's
and
amazing, Willow.
Another one. A dragon.
Wow. Yep, that's great. I love that. I love the fairy and the unicorn too. So fun to see these. Does anybody have any questions for either Colin or Dan or us, or any thoughts you have or want to share? Cora?
Yeah.
This picture.
Oh.
With
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's so cool, Cora. Wow. I see Carnelian and one of the other fairies and Tom. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. That is so cool. I love seeing the fairy drawings for the first time. It's really exciting.
Can you say anything?
Sydney.
Oh,
Amir?
Sydney. Hi, Sydney.
Hi. Do you want to say anything about your?
I made this for me.
How would you
Uh-huh.
explain that?
I thought to be I don't really know what it is.
Okay.
Do you wanna
Totally
show
fair.
them the other one too?
Yeah. And also,
And we did this one at the same time, the night scene where Tom was getting to know the unicorn.
Oh, that's so cool. That's beautiful.
And there's a little pet inside there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought we could draw a body pet
Yeah.
just to know it was ours.
We do
That
have a
makes
question for Dan. What program were you using to do your artwork?
That was Photoshop.
Photoshop. Cool. How long did you have to practice to get so good at it?
Well, I'm 32 going on 33, and I've had a pencil in hand for as long as I can remember. So they say every drawing prepares you for the one that comes next. So this has been a long time in the making.
Yeah.
We really enjoyed watching it come together. And it seemed like there was some red in there for a while. Did you? Yeah.
So what happened there was I was drawing. I had the lines, and they had all those big areas of black, and I didn't want to lose all of those lines. So I had a different color in order to make sure that I could actually see the lines. And when I had all the big dark shapes set, I turned all the red black, and that turned into the big dark areas you saw.
Oh, wow. How interesting. I didn't know that's how it worked. Thank you.
Welcome.
Oliver and Graceland, you had a question?
Ooh, I've been holding my arm up so much it hurts. But anyway, what I wanted to say is well, Dan, I love your chainmail outfit. It is so cool.
Thank you.
When we were learning about medieval history this year, we learned about chainmail, and I think it's so cool that you're wearing like a chainmail outfit. It's
Thanks. I made it myself.
I also
Wow.
love the picture. I love how you gave Cornelian you gave Cornelian like those big beautiful butterfly wings.
Thank you. I figured that the ruler of the fairies, they deserve monarch butterfly wings, so that's how they got that.
The monarch butterfly.
Can I say what I want to say?
Yeah, go ahead, Oliver.
Well, this is my question, Dan. Well, that picture was just incredibly amazing. And I really, really loved it.
Thank you. Took me over a week to do, so took a while to get there, but I'm glad you like it.
A week?
Yes,
Wow.
it did.
You must have been working really hard. It was amazing.
Oh, and I like your chainmail outfit.
Well, thank you.
Any other questions or anything? So so our next performance. Oh, yes, Sydney, you have a thought.
What did you think?
Thank you. Do you want to tell them
Yeah,
something
I
about the
really
picture?
loved it.
You loved the story
Yeah.
and the picture?
Yeah.
Was anyone
that.
surprised to find out about Tom and his history and that he was chasing the unicorn?
You surprised?
Yeah. Well, you?
Very surprised.
I was surprised too.
Yeah, I know we went a long time without seeing Tom. I was missing Tom, and now I'm actually missing the other characters, and I'm excited to get back to them. So we have exciting news that we just got a question from Mia and Fiona before we say that. That's a great question. Who named Mintini? Dominic?
I'm going to let Graceland answer that question.
I named Mintini because Dad was asking me like what should we name like he said what should we name the unicorn, and I just stood there, and at first like Mintini popped in my head, and I said Mintini, we should name it Mintini.
Yeah, there's like no hesitation. It just jumped right out.
Yeah, and I made the skirt for the stuffed bear.
Very nice. So Yeah, so our next and final 2 episodes for season 1 are actually going to be performed live in Northfield, Vermont, which is our town, as part of Northfield's Labor Day weekend celebrations. We really do it up big here for Labor Day in Northfield. We will also, if you aren't local and you can't join us, we will also be coming back to Zoom to do our final 2 performances live and releasing the podcasts as usual. But really, we just have one more performance left of this season, which is hard to believe. So we'll be doing episodes 14 and 15 for our final performance in a few weeks. I'm not exactly sure what the date is, but it's a few weeks from now. So hopefully you can join us then. And in the meantime, if you have any questions or you'd like to share any artwork or thoughts or anything, you have more questions for the artists, please email petrathedragon@gmail.com. Just Gmail. Yeah. Okay. Wait, Mia, did you have another question? Yes.
I did. Will there be a season 2?
Yes, there will definitely be a season 2. We have thoughts. We have many thoughts.
Oh, that's so exciting.
Yeah, we're gonna take a little break once we finish with season 1, but we'll get it up on its feet as soon as we can, for sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
and
Amazing to look
for
forward
season 2, if any of you out there have ideas about characters that you'd like to see or meet, or creatures that you'd like to see or meet, you should email Petra, because this is the time where we're collecting as many fun ideas that we can come up with. And Oliver and Gracelyn have had a great time contributing and being a big part of the story so far, but we'd like to invite all of you as well to be a part of it. So any ideas you have, please send them along.
Yep. Well, thank you so much, everyone. It was good to see you all. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Colin, for your wonderful work. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us here.
All right. Thank you. Bye, everybody. Have a good evening.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye. See you tomorrow. See you tomorrow.